Я правильно понимаю, что я никого не жду, просто начинаю рассказывать, а там уже кто подключится, тот подключится.
Да, конечно, конечно.
Okay. Good morning, everyone who's online with us. First of all, I'd like to apologize for not being able to conduct a walk as we planned. I got a flu. I'm feeling not too good, but as soon as I'm okay, as soon as I'm able to go outside, we'll have that walk. So I'll show you the Dostoevsky Petersburg as it was planned. And today we are going just to talk a bit about Dostoevsky, about the city, and about the crime and punishment heroes. So today we celebrate 200 years since Fyodor Dostoevsky was born. Well, first of all, who is he? Who was he? He's certainly one of Russia's and probably the world's greatest authors. He's one of the best psychologists, probably. He's noted for his deep psychological insights. He delved into complex issues such as poverty, exploitation, morality, existence of God, the essence of good and evil, and so on. This is why he's so much loved in Russia and in the world. What most scholars note is that all of his works are marked by great empathy for the poor and the downtrodden. But how he came to that? Here are a few of his life milestones. So he was born on November 11th in 1821 in Moscow. And then when he was 16 years old, he moved to St. Petersburg to attend the Military Engineering Institute. But then in 1844, he left his well-established position and devoted himself only and mainly to writing. His first published novel was called Poor Folk. It was published in 1846, and it got a general critical acclaim. 3 years later, in 1849, Dostoevsky came to a moment when he thought that his life was over. He was condemned to death by firing squad for his connections to a secret society which was called Utopian Socialists. But then, in the last moment before, when the firemen were ready to shoot, his sentence was changed by Tsar's decree to sentence to 4 years hard labor in Siberia. So he spent 4 years in Siberia, and then it was followed by several years in pressed service as a soldier in a Siberian garrison. I'm very sorry for my speech. I'm having temperature and not feeling too well. Well, in 1859, Dostoevsky was finally allowed to return to St. Petersburg. Here he continued his literary career. He published The House of Dead. It was the first ever written novel in Russia that dealt with Russian prisons. It described Russian prisons, and this is where Dostoevsky's experience in Siberia came in handy. Dostoevsky was a gambler. He often fell into a lack of funds and spent several years in Europe hiding from his creditors. And this is actually how the novel Crime and Punishment was written. I'm sorry, how it was not written at first, because Dostoevsky had only 3 weeks to write a novel that his publisher was waiting for, and it had to be Crime and Punishment, but the novel was too long and too complicated, and instead of that, Dostoevsky wrote the play. And the novel, The Player, also reflects some of his life experience as a gambler, as a person who's always in debt and can stop playing. His last novel was The Brothers Karamazov. He finished it in 1881, only 2 months before his death. And when it came to the writer's funeral, tens of thousands of mourners attended the procession. Which obviously means that by the time the writer died, he was very much loved and very much known in the country. As I said earlier, he explored the lives and destinies of the poorest people, of the most desperate ones, which is why he got such love from his readers, not just fellow writers, but readers also. And in Crime and Punishment is the book which is probably the best example of his interest to the life of poor. This book captures, first of all, this book captures very Petersburgian atmosphere, and it is also focused on poor folk and the insulted and humiliated, as two of his earlier works are called. It takes place on the crowded streets of the city's most vivid district. It takes place in cheap taverns, in cheap restaurants, and in small and dark rooms of the tenement houses. And the book takes place in the city's district called Kolomna. Kolomna is one of the oldest historical cities districts. It has always been inhabited by the middle class, workers, and writers. Kolomna is rather good, is represented rather good in Russian classical literature, and Dostoevsky himself described in his in his works in Crime and Punishment, the houses and places he knew himself very well, and he lived in where he lived himself. I'll start with showing just a second. So the first place, city's place I'm showing is called Sinai Square. This is where Crime and Punishment actually starts. This is where Raskolnikov conceived the murder of the pawnbroker. In the times of Dostoevsky, in the middle of 19th century, this square and the adjoining Sinai market was actually the city's filthy underbelly. It was also the city's largest and the cheapest food market. Well, here I hope that you see this little house with columns here, the yellow one. In the times of Dostoevsky, it was a guardhouse, and the writer himself spent here a couple of days in 1874. He was arrested for the violation of censorship rules when he published in the magazine Gражданин or Citizen some article that was hugely disliked by city's government. And Crime and Punishment starts here on this square when Rodion Raskolnikov overheard the talk between the pawnbroker's sister and some passerby. He heard that the next day the pawnbroker would be alone in her house, and he decided to rob and kill her. Then sorry. Sorry, I'm just going to show you another picture. This is Kokushkin Bridge. It's located just 2 minutes walk from Sinai Square, and this is the bridge that most of the Crime and Punishment's heroes used to cross several times a day. It goes from Sadovaya Street to Грибоедова Canal embankment. In the times of Dostoevsky, Грибоедова Canal was called Catherine's Canal after the Empress Catherine III. But then in 1922, after the revolution, when the new Soviet government decided to get rid from all the imperial street names. It was renamed after the writer Griboyedov. So I'll keep calling this kennel Griboyedov, but just keep in mind that that's a relatively new name. So back to the bridge. This bridge here on the right side ends in the shortest lane of the city, Kokushkin Lane. It is only about 30 or 35 meters long. The lane was named after a drinking establishment, the owner of which was a merchant, Vasily Kokushkin. And we see Kokushkin's house here. So the drinking house was on the first floor. The merchant himself lived on the second floor. And as you see, the third floor has very small windows, and it's not really high. This is because the top stories back in the days, in the 19th century, were considered to be the cheapest ones. They were inhabited by those who could not afford relatively good apartments. And this is the good example of how the cheap tenement house were arranged. We had some kind of business on the first floors. The second floors were usually inhabited by the house owners, and the third and highest floors were rented out. And this bridge is a good example of city's eclectical outlook, because here we see it's one end goes to the quite simple and cheap house, while the other end, let me show you, it's yes, the other end of the bridge finishes with a quite beautiful and rather expensive house. It is called the tenement house, owned by the merchant Radikov Rajnov. It faces 3 streets, and it is quite, well, it's quite beautiful, and it's a good example of city's eclectical city. It is a good example of the architectural eclecticism, which was I'm sorry. Well, the right side of this house overlooks the Stolyarny Lane. Stolyarny Lane, it's a place where Raskolnikov, the main character in Crime and Punishment, lived. And during Dostoevsky's time, this was one of the capital's probably seediest spots. It had 16 buildings, and all of them contained 18 drinking establishments. So it was very much like modern Rubinstein Street with many restaurants and bars. But today it is a quiet street with the rather expensive, with first-class Russian restaurants and so on. But back in the days, in the middle of the 19th century, it was quite crowded, quite noisy, and quite dirty. So I'm going to switch to another photo. Yes, this is the house on the corner of Stolarny Lane and Grozdanskaya Street. It's the house where Dostoevsky decided that Rodion Raskolnikov would live. So here we see a plate, a marble plate commemorating Raskolnikov's place of living. Well, as you can see, it's a corner house. Dostoevsky himself preferred to rent his apartments in houses like that. That was because that way, in 19th century, you could get more light in your small apartments, because the houses were small, they were built very close to one another, and there was quite little daylight in most of the apartments. But if you manage to rent a flat on the corner of a corner house, you get more light. So that's what Dostoevsky liked very much. That was his, he had always tried to find for himself. And that's why Raskolnikov lived in a house like that. And we move to another photo. Yes, this one, just another 2 or 3 minutes walk on the Griboyedov Canal embankment. We see Sonia Marmeladova's house. Dostoevsky himself doesn't actually say in the novel that Sonia lived exactly here, but the scientists, the scholars that explored the novel's topography say that this was the right place. So, until recently, and in Dostoevsky time, it had been painted light green, and it was a 3-story building, not 5, like here. But still, the call is not the same. The stories were read, but that literary fans still have no doubts that this is the home where Sonia Marmeladova lived and saved Rodion's life. And we move to another home. And this is the at the home of the old moneylender, the old pawnbroker. Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment writes that it took 730 steps to get from Raskolnikov's house to this house. I frankly never never got the chance to count the steps, and I planned for the walk that had to be postponed. I planned to turn on the step track and count whether it's really 730 steps, more or less. But well, anyway, as well as with Sonia's house, the address of the old moneylender has been the subject of research and discussions because Dostoevsky doesn't give the exact address, only description. But this residential building is now considered to be the right place, the place of murder, the place of robbery. And it overlooks two streets, and it has a yard, and Raskolnikov walked inside on this side of the house and walked out on the other that we can't see right now on the photo. Or I was going to repeat his walk and show you live, and I will absolutely do this when I have the chance to conduct the walk. And the last photo I'd like to show you today. Just a minute. Yes. This is the place where the walk ends. This place is called Seven Bridges or Semimostia. It's one of the most picturesque and most loved places of the whole city. It is not directly described in Crime and Punishment, but this place is quite important for Dostoevsky himself. This is a large square with 7 bridges around. One of the bridges is described in Dostoevsky's novel White Nights, and this is the place that he used to pass almost every day while walking to the Petroshevsky Society, the one that got him imprisoned and almost killed. I can't show you the panoramic view, but it's really beautiful. It's really wonderful. And when I'm able, we'll walk one of the adjoining canals and repeat Dostoevsky walk to Petrashevsky Society. And I'm terribly sorry. This is about it. I don't feel too well, and I know that my I'm sorry, but I'm afraid that this is all I'm able to talk about right now. I'm feeling rather poor, and I'd like to finish this little introduction into the walk. And as soon as I'm able, I'll conduct the walk. I promise. I speak English much better than that. It's just today, just not feeling too good. Masha? Okay. Then then I'm finishing here, right? Masha? Anyone?